Morning, everybody, live from Texas. It's a little cold here today. We had a cold front to come through, so i.e. my little turtleneck. I'm so excited today. Today is day 4, or session 4 of our series around the HR Fireside Chats. And we are so excited to be here this morning. Just a little housekeeping. If you'll just introduce your name, your company, your role in the chat, it helps us understand who's a part of the meeting today. You know, these are very intimate types of discussion, and we want to be sensitive and be able to share. So I'm Tiki Favorath. I'm the Senior Partner and Managing Director at HR & Co. We're a little firm that help organizations in the commercial space and in the government space think about their end-to-end human capital, and we love people chaos. And one of the things that we want to do here is take everything that we know and share it in a very intimate setting. 2 things I'm going to turn over to my co-host. There's a ton of information out there in the ecosystem. I'm constantly attending webinars, chats, reading white papers and articles, but we really want this to be a forum where we kind of bring it down just a little bit, talk about some of the essentials, but most importantly, address any questions that you have. So this session is designed to have our marshmallows and our chocolate and our graham crackers and really begin to talk about what you need. And if you need something deeper, if you need more insights, we most definitely will make ourselves available offline. So we want to kind of bring down the noise a little bit and just share some of the essentials. And if you need more tactical, operational kind of nuts and bolts of what to do, we're more than happy to do that. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn over to my co-host, my good friend, Allison.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to see some familiar faces, both that are first-timers here and those who have been joining us every week. As I mentioned earlier, this is number 4 of 6, so we have 2 more to go. And for those of you that may not know me well, my name is Allison Nail-Malone. My company's name is Malone Consultants Group, where we think, be, and do leadership differently.
Yes.
Our intention today to get this information and conversation in 45 minutes or less, because we know that your time is valuable. So we want to thank you for setting aside some time to connect with us and connect with each other. And as always, we want this to be about and for you. So this is engaging. Anytime that there is a question or comment, please make sure that you put that in the chat. You can even unmute yourself, because this is a time for us to have an intimate conversation versus us just giving information. But Tiki and I will share some content and then have an opportunity to discuss. And for our first connection, what we want to do is the engagement piece. Use your phone or a web browser. So yeah, the phone. And so what I'd love for you to do is to let us know, what new titles have you acquired during COVID-19? So what you want to do is pull out your phone and text 22333. And in the area where you type your answer, put Allison N67, and then whatever your answer is. Or you can pull up a web browser, which is polev.com/AllisonN67, and enter in whatever that is. What new titles have you acquired since COVID-19? For me, it has been, let's make the school scheduler, teacher. Let's see, what else have we acquired? What are some additional roles, even in the organization or at home, that you have had to adjust to during COVID-19? I'm going to type mine in so we can get this started. So you'll text to 22333, type in Allison N67, and then your answer. Firefighter, yes. Looks like it's got a little bit of a lag today. Business continuity expert, sous chef, nice. I love that. Counselor, definitely. I think that's all of these have been part of our new way of living through this and adjusting. And I really love pivoting. A chess player, heck yeah. So as you can see, we're all really all experiencing something new and added to our additional responsibilities. And that's part of the conversation today, is really thinking about what does that even look like in the transition phase and in the future state. So Tiki, I'm gonna go ahead and lock our answers here. And if you kind of go over a little bit of the housekeeping piece of this.
Absolutely. So again, just quickly, 45 minutes. If you'd like to add your name, title, email address to the chat feature, we like to send our Q&A and any insights officially to people who said send it to me. So we want to be respectful of your email space. To ask a question, unmute yourself, raise your hand, put it in the chat. We want to hear from you. We want to make this really down to earth and for you. And then all questions and answers would be sent out formally post this session. So don't feel like you're in a big audience. This is really for you guys. So that's it. Let's do it. Let's rock.
Do this. All right. Yep. So today's conversation is for us to really be thinking about what does life and work look like once we transition back to our respective places. So we're now living in a world that is new rules apply. Managing changes, best practices, working harder, and or even working smarter. It feels like that's just not enough right now. And when everything changes so quickly, these practices can sometimes keep us stuck living in the past. So there's a new way to kind of win at this by asking really powerful questions and allowing that collective voice and energy of everyone on the team or organization to emerge. COVID-19 has pushed organizations to an age of forward thinking than we've ever seen before. And initially when all of this started, we kind of had to think in the moment right now to solve for the immediate X of our organization's way of working and executing our deliverables. Future forward-thinking leaders are the ones that are driven by their own strong vision alongside the business mission. They're now thinking about what courageous and bold decisions have to be made and need to be made. And this includes taking very calculated risks to allow your leaders to be more successful and achieve more during this time. Especially when we think about getting back to our respective work environments. As a future forward-thinking leader, are you asking yourself, how will you be able to sense the new potential of future relationships with your colleagues, with your leaders, with your clients, with investors, with your partners? These are your stakeholders you need to be thinking about. And then specifically those that are in the front lines doing the work. So transitioning from pre-COVID to present COVID, quieted quick thinking centered around change and communication management. And so the time to be thinking, planning, and designing the transition post-COVID now. So change management is complex, and guiding people through change is even more complex. So this is the time to be strategically mindful and create the go-to toolkit to business and work after COVID. And so Tiki is going to talk a little bit here in a moment about more specific strategies. And so during this time, I really invite you to consider thinking beyond the current state and to shifting your mindset towards what's called the transition state and then the future state. So the key thing here is don't assume things are going to go back to the way they were. If you had a workforce that didn't go virtual. Many of particularly our younger tenured professionals had been told that work was done a specific way and couldn't be done a certain way that now we're experiencing could actually be done. And this even included people who are on the front lines that couldn't work virtually, but they're seeing a new way of thinking, new strategies of how business is done, and they're always now going to be asking, what else can be done differently that we always thought was going to be the same? So are you and your leadership teams taking an analytical and methodical viewpoint of what that might look like? You need to be ready. before you are asked on how work is going to get done, how communication happens and will happen, how members and clients will collaborate and are going to collaborate, and how we can actually be more inclusive to and for our workforce. I think that's another big shift that's been happening in the present COVID state, is how do we be more inclusive with members of our team that maybe we didn't see before. And so one of the most important areas as it pertains to your human capital is that for many of you and your organizations, it was unfathomable to think about certain roles that could be done virtually, that you could do work with a certain staff and still get those deliverables done. And I'm sure you have experienced the uncovering of areas and skills that were super strong. And you're probably also uncovering between leadership teams and leaders and individuals within your organization that maybe were hidden before, that are now being uncovered, that need additional strengthening. So how are you and your organization really thinking about continuing that path of serving and supporting your leaders, you, and the rest of the organization? So what's your plan for bouncing back? When you draw the steps up that you intend to take, you want to think broadly first and deeply, and then take that long view. And so this is a great time to be gathering your strategic change makers that will become your change coalition, which Tiki will talk more in depth about. I want you to consider your leaders and cultural influencers. And cultural influencers are those individuals that don't necessarily have a leadership title or responsibility, but they are the individuals that you see others gravitate towards for problem solving, for seeking. They also are the ones that tend to step up in courageous ways in difficult times and for difficult situations. So I want you to think about who comes to mind first, or who are your collaborators. They're the ones that are assertive, they're confident, they're visionary, and they're typically optimistic about change. You think about one or two people with that. Second, I want you to think about who comes to mind when you think of protector. They're the ones that are diplomatic, they're dependable, they're good listeners, they're loyal, and they tend to be the ones to provide that deep insight. Who are your initiators? They are your change drivers. They're goal and action oriented, they're business focused and very decisive. They're the to-doers. And lastly, who comes to mind when you think of, and they are typically the ones that most people get annoyed with because they're the ones that ask all the questions. I see some of you like, oh, I know exactly who that is, nodding your head. Because questioners are the ones that tend to be very analytical. They tend to be more objective and business focused because they're asking all the questions nobody else is asking or even thinking about asking. And they need to know purpose and rationale for the change. And when you have these individuals as part of your change coalition, then you can start really making momentum in that post-COVID transition. These individuals are the types of leaders you want to assist and facilitate with you and to be your advocate in those changes. And as you begin and or continue the preparation for post-crisis, really invite you to think about the Iceberg Model. I'm sure many of you have seen the Iceberg visual, where there's more below the water than above the water. And when you think about in this model, the top portion of the iceberg, when we're thinking about this next transition, the top of the iceberg are the things that we say, how we get work done. Below the iceberg is really how we get the work done, the reality of it. So for example, the top of the iceberg are the ways that we get things done by business vision, strategies, shared values, policies, goals, and the structures that we have in place. That's typically the easiest way things get done. But I really want to invite you and your leadership to be thinking about what's below the surface, the larger portion of that iceberg. You need to have those conversations and collaborations around these things which are below the iceberg. What are the shared assumptions and perceptions? What are the traditions and or generational or departmental norms that need to be taken into account? What are the unwritten rules and feelings and historical stories that need to either be rewritten now or retold, or maybe they need to shift because they're going to bump up against the changes that need to take place? So I invite you to consider, what is your strategy during the crisis to prepare for the right after the crisis and the new normal? Your answers to the questions above should point you to the set of projects for tackling coronavirus-related problems and solutions afterwards. The challenge is to prioritize and coordinate those initiatives that will future-proof your organization and teams. Beware of starting numerous projects all at once that'll depend on the same critical resources. Might be specific individuals, such as top managers, or specific departments, such as IT. With too many initiatives, you could end up with a war over resources that delays or derails the strategic response that you need to have. And last but not least, being future forward thinking now and designing those change initiatives for the transition back as well as the future state will not only build support for the organization as a whole, but it will also anchor the corporate culture of sustainability, resiliency, agility, and to nurture the growth mindset that is going to be necessary to be successful in this future forward state. Tiki, I'm going to hand over as we kind of talk about how to build those strategies and deliverables around this leadership mindset and moving forward.
Yep, thank you. So good insights. I was taking some notes as you were talking. So one of the things that we always talk about the what, and so we always start with the leadership first. And so now it's the how do you get that done? And so there are many tools out there. As a matter of fact, as a certified partner with Predictive Index, we're talking about how to help organizations move forward. And so there's a couple of things that I want to put in your toolbox as you begin to think about, as HR practitioners or talent practitioners, how do you begin to help the organization do that? So number one, you need to be really clear about what is the strategy going forward. If you have not received that, start thinking about, with, Allison mentioned your change makers and your leadership team, what will we need to do with the people, our programs, our processes, our policies, and just basically maybe just have a blue cloud, brainstorming session to say, if we think about the employee life cycle, what happens with the acquisition of talent, what happens, how we develop talent, how we promote talent, how we assess talent performance, and just go down the list and have this kind of blue cloud type of thinking. The leadership team is going to need three essential things as we begin to move out. They need to know where the essential players are. There is an assessment that you could probably deploy, or we could deploy, to help you understand the head, heart, and briefcase of talent. So if you need to mobilize talent a different way. So Allison mentioned someone having more analytical skills versus team skills versus innovation skills. You may have come into COVID-19 saying, oh, we're innovating and we're doing all this great stuff, but the strategy has changed. And how do you align the right analytical problem-solving leaders to get to where the new strategy may be moving? So how do we give you insights into who those people are and how you can begin to assign these new projects, these new teams, these new efforts in order to do that? Secondly, the dynamics of the team have changed. So how do you look at maybe small mini surveys to say what has changed around the culture, the dynamics? Maybe looking at job descriptions have changed. Maybe the roles that we had in the past are not the roles in the future. So how do you begin to look at those roles and job fits? What's been the role of managers through this process? Have we developed them, trained them for these types of initiatives? We know that people leave managers and not companies, and now more so in this kind of virtual environment, what has been the role of managers and what will they be in the future? So one of the biggest things is number one, is that you want to do a vulnerability assessment and understand where are your leaders, who were they before, and where do we need them in the future. Take the entire employee life cycle and say, what will be different? What tools and skills and resources will be different, and what's the amount of effort in order to change or convert And while we're in this period, to begin to write that down. What does leadership look like? What does development look like? What will it mean for programs? Last week we talked about cost containment efforts. And so how do we reorganize this as we kind of go forward? So thing number one is that you have to know what the strategy is. In absence of it, make up your own people strategy, and then do that vulnerability assessment all the way across. So as you start to have these conversations, you have a clear picture, a roadmap of what may be in scope and what may be out of scope, and then what's the required effort to get that done. And I'll just give you a personal example. I'm working with a client today. We had this in-person leadership development program. And so we just met with them and they decided to go virtual. So now we've taken a behavioral assessment to help the leaders understand this leadership cohort. So what are their natural tendencies and skills, and how do we begin to restructure our content, because they need to come out as leaders emerging with a different set of skills to help the organization go in a different direction. So that's like real time adjustment. So the next thing is designing the future state. From an HR perspective, one of the things that's going to be important is how are we organized, who are we leading, how are we onboarding and developing, and how are we moving talent through the organization. A lot of your employees, depending on where they are, I'm going to tell you, EAP, everyone is going through some type of mental shift. Most folks getting their kids back to school and the stress of what that will mean, or what does it mean for your policies as far as people working at home with kids, because so much has changed. And honestly, some of the leaders I talk to, they're like, I'm burnt, I'm just in transparency, like, I'm getting up early before the kids. I have 6 hours of homework because I guess the school figured I could do their teacher's full-time job, plus my full-time job, plus cooking, and then I'm working hours after work to get things done. And so we need to think about what that culture and how do you care for your team members as it relates to that. So design what that future state looks like and build some very small, as Allison mentioned, not a lot, processes or programs that's going to help reshape the culture and get people back engaged in a different way. Two more things and I'll stop. Building a change coalition. I'm pretty certain all of you guys have had to do things different, and you probably had folks that were resistors before, basically on board. What's the good we can take out of this change and multiply? And what were the things we had to just get done to get it done? You've probably spent more in capital equipment to get more people at home, more in technology, more in resources like Zoom and HubSpot and all these different things. Start thinking about how do you put this in your toolkit and build a coalition of change around what do we want to keep and what do we want to give away. I think next week we're talking about the virtual work environment. Do we keep it or does it go away? And one of my clients, which is a bank client, believe it or not, 90% of their workforce is at home. And so talking to the CFO, I was like, well, how do we get people back into the bank? And I was like, we got to figure that out, because now people have figured out that they can work from home. And what does that mean? So find out the things that you want to keep for change, build your coalition of it. Do not bite off more than you can chew. I think I used to say, don't boil the ocean is the term, and pick one or two strategic efforts to bring forward, but still have your hit list, because there may be something that comes around. And then finally, what is your transition model? You could use ProSci. There's all kind of change management models. Like, what's going to be the hierarchy of change? And I kind of use threat levels the first session: wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4. If this happens, then we can do this. This is the effort that it's going to take, and this is the timing. And as practitioners and leaders, we need to be able to articulate clearly. Doesn't mean that things are not going to change. What is the go forward plan? And know that we've thought through all of the data and analytics of what that means. Spans and layers, spans of controls. We used to have big organizations. Maybe now we need nimble organizations. Work with your teams now where you can start thinking through that, or partner with your business leaders to say, the reality is we need to start thinking about what this looks like. They probably have cost containment targets. They probably have, PTI, whatever your financial metrics are, because leaders are going to be thinking about saving the checkbook, which they should. And how do we do that through people? We've talked about furloughs. We've talked about early retirements. We've talked about cutting reduction in salaries. We've talked about programs. Everything is on the table, and you think about that as the impact to your organization. So if I had to kind of put this in a shell as practitioners, what we should be doing in our kind of strategic conversations, what is your vulnerability and what's your plan? Take the entire employee life cycle with your teams and say, what if scenarios? You know, one of the biggest thing I've been talking about is technology spend and how do we reduce that? There are many platforms where you can basically reduce the spend of technology, look at your vendors, and make more proficient decisions so that you can come back to the table with some ROI on that. Design for the future, org structures, leaderships, development programs, compensation, you know, all of those types of programs. What will it look like going forward? Build a coalition of change. What did you do now that's really good that you want to multiply and bring forward? But what was just basically like an extension cord? We just had to do it to get it done, and we want to kind of wean ourselves. And then what is the plan? There is nothing like having these great ideas and not having a well scripted, thought out plan to help leaders get on board. These are the conditions. This is the recommendation. This is what the return will be, and this is how we get it done and how long we believe it will take to get there. If you don't have a plan that you're walking around with as your walk around deck thinking about the future, then we're already behind the 8 ball, because things are starting, I believe, and I'm not really sure to let up. And there's going to be this big surge, like we send everybody home. There's going to be this big surge to get everybody back. And we have the role to help the organization do that thoughtfully and carefully, and make sure that you have counselors and EAP, because believe it or not, people may not be saying it, but they're super, super stressed. And, you know, being at home with your kids for 3 to 4 weeks, there's a new attachment, there's a new bond. And some people may have the grief of letting them go back to school or whatever the case may be. And what does that mean? So again, ton of research out there. I was reading the last Gartner report yesterday. If you need more technical insights, if you want to think about what this means for your organization, we can most definitely do that. And as HR practitioners or talent practitioners, our job, and I tell people this, there was an episode on Grey's Anatomy, so that's probably going to age me. And the doctor was asking Alex to watch the infant baby. And Alex was like, oh, I want to do all these other things. And why? She said, you have one job. Your one job is if something happens to this baby, someone is there. And as HR practitioners and talent practitioners, we have one job in the organization, which is to watch the people. And when leaders are thinking about fighting the big fires, they're going to come to you and says, what do we do about our talent? And we need to be game plan ready, because that is one of the largest expenses on the balance sheet. And I know businesses have been holding the line to not impact people and their families, but we need to be very thoughtful about the recommendations and had time to digest what the implications are. So that's my 2 cents. Take what you need, leave what you don't. We're building blueprints every day and scenario-based insights to say, if this is the condition, then this. It may need to be tweaked and adjusted. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to have a plan. So leadership plus process equals a good plan. And that's the only thing I can say. And Allison, let's just open up the lines. Questions, comments, criticisms, concerns. We want to answer them for you.
Yeah, so thank you. We've already got a few things in the chat box, but I'd love to just first open up the line. I'd love to see if anyone had anything specific, either some best practices that are already working that you've already, as a practitioner, as a talent practitioner, HR practitioner, that's working that you'd like to share. We've been doing that on our past calls of our individuals sharing this is what we're doing and what seems to be working, or questions or comments you have on the content that we've talked about today, and we'll address a couple of the things that are in the chat right now in just a moment.
Bring it on. We'll take it.
And the key thing to be thinking about too, and you touched on this too, Tiki, is having that plan in place, and also knowing the flexibility that it may change. And one thing that we're learning is that your leaders and your team members prefer certainty, and that's how they feel more comfortable. And so when you can provide them, here's the framework that establishes the certainty they need, as long as you are open on here's what it looks like today with the information that we have today, and be open to this could change tomorrow, but we'll let you know.
Yeah.
So one of the questions, Tiki, if you tackle this, and I'll give some information too, is with the reentry back into the office, what would you advise for the transition and impending difficulties to come?
Yeah, so that's really that's a very good question, and I would probably answer that in 3 ways. So one, there's a scenario that says reentry back into the office. And what does that mean? So you may take that to what are the critical roles? So you may do a role transition. You may do a site transition. Some organizations are global, so they may say, you know, China, the UK, this may come back on, or IT team in first, you know, this team in second. And so a part of that is what's the critical point? How do you onboard those teams? Because you still want to leave some teams at home just in case, that kind of scenario. What is it going to mean from, you know, all your capital equipment? So people may have laptops and screens and monitors. What's the process to do that? Do you have a phased approach? Do you say everybody comes in Alpha Bravo team? You're 2 days in, 2 days off until we're back to a full integration of everybody kind of business as usual? What happens if you have colleagues that their schools are not back open and you still need people at home? So there's a lot of scenarios, which I say use that scenario based, the what if model, and then how do you begin to do that? I would just suggest right now is that you don't say Monday morning everybody back into the office, because the reality, start surveying your employees today. Are your schools still open? If not, start collecting that intelligence right now. What are you hearing? Or ask your managers to collect that, because there may be a probable way to do that. Maybe it's just all senior leaders back first. Then it's a wave down using a leadership hierarchy. But again, there's so many dynamics played out. I know here in Texas, schools are supposed to be out through summer. And so parents may not have the flexibility to come back into the office because that condition. I know, so also too with the coronavirus first acts, there is some provision around people that need to stay at home to take care of their kids and protecting them for leave. So what are some of the new federal mandates around that? So the biggest thing is, what's the scenario? Start collecting intelligence from your employees and start building out what that plan could look like as far as coming back online into the office. Or do you say there's a staging period? We're out to May, starting June. Here's our phased approach, because we'll know more then. That
And
was a long-winded answer, but hopefully.
no, I think that was awesome. And I think the key thing is to always remind people, and you'll have to use repetition, because as adult learners, we need repetition, is that this is what this looks like today. And tomorrow this may change. And we're going based upon the information that we have today, and we'll let you know if something changes again. So we've repeated that like 3 or 4 times here. So you want to make sure that you do the same thing with your leaders, that your leaders are communicating that over and over as well to their teams, and then collectively as an organization. Would love to know if there's any other thoughts, questions, best practices that you have before we start wrapping it up.
Yep.
I have a question. This is Shamira. Hi, guys.
Hey, Shamira.
Hello. So speaking of leaders, when we have leaders that are coming back into the office, and we have an emotional employee population who everyone is just dealing with a lot, and now we have the transition, what would the recommendation be for supporting the leaders who now have the add-on of dealing with the emotions and the return to the office, in addition to being able to balance out their workload?
Good question. Allison, I'm so sorry. I'm getting a 911 call from a client. So
Oh, gosh.
I'm going to drop you guys. I apologize. This is the new norm, so I need to go, but I'll let you wrap it up. But I'll follow up on any questions that came up.
Okay.
Sorry.
And pivot always. So Shamira, a couple of things that I would consider is number one, who are the leaders of those leaders, and are they having daily connections or at least every other day connections, so that their leaders understand the additional responsibilities that are potentially being put on their plate. Number two is making sure that your leaders are not being the therapists of their employees. And that is a really hard thing to do, especially one as if we're an HR practitioner doing that, or leaders who lead with heart and emotion first. It can be hard to let go of that I'm not their therapist. So as leaders and as talent leaders, as HR practitioners, we need to give permission to our leaders that you are not your employees' therapist, and making sure that they have the tools and resources to give, or at least to be able to direct them towards that emotional component. And I think the third thing is just to make sure that your leaders understand that, particularly if they're leaders who don't typically lead by heart and emotion first, is that compassion is so important. And compassion looks very different, but that is our responsibility as leaders first, is the business objectives through our people and that compassion, and to understand that the work still needs to get done, that our clients and our customers and the people that we serve is the way to continue to move forward. And building that expectation, I think, is going to be really important right now. And then to repeat that probably within the next 3 months, as we kind of transition, or 3 months after the transitional time of entering back into the workforce.
I agree. Thanks, Allison.
You're welcome. Anything else? I'd love to know anything else, best practices, questions, or comments before we start to wrap up.
You know, I was just going to add our plan. We're a very large corporation, and we're kind of following the lead of our corporate security department, or corporate safety department, that is tuned in to the federal recommendations and state recommendations, and here in Arkansas, our schools are out through this until summer. So our plan is currently to go back, start going back the week of May 4th. But to Tiki's point earlier, it can't just be everybody just show up that Monday morning. We'll still have to have a staggered approach. I think we'll still be under the kind of a 6-foot rule. If you can somehow stagger the people where they're sitting and interacting with each other. So we're gonna have to take all that into account. And I think for me, I've got an IT staff. We tend to be mostly introverted. So Allison, to your point about kind of that emotional component, I think there will be some that maybe are a little bit more extroverted that will try to go to the leadership to be the kind of counselor or therapist. And then you may have to continue to reiterate for the folks that are a little more introverted that, hey, here are the tools and support that we have for you that's available, and encourage them to have that outlet. So it's just a couple of points I wanted to point out.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, well, for some reason, this slide has been deleted. I'm not sure what happened, but the question is, as we wrap up, I'd love to know, so if you'll just type this in the chat, that would be great, or you can share it verbally, but what has been a key takeaway for you? What was either an aha moment, or maybe it was a reaffirmation of the things that you're doing today? So what is one key takeaway that you received out of our conversation today? So if you'll just put that in the chat box, that would be helpful. And I'll go ahead and move to our next screen here. So if you'll just write a couple of things in as to what's been a key takeaway, a reminder, an affirmation from our conversation today. What was most helpful?
Allison, this is Felicia. One of the things that I liked that you said was about, who is the protector, who is the initiator, who are the questioners. Just making sure that I know who those people are when I need to delegate responsibilities to. And some of them may just right there and just trying to make sure that I understand what we're trying to do and what we're going. The other piece was and the vulnerability and assessment in the transitioning way.
Lisa, what was the last thing you said? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was the vulnerability and the transition in ways. Who comes on first, who's going to be second. We work with students on. So at the University of Arkansas, all the summer school courses are online for the summer. But what are our steps for us to get back into it? So I've been talking to my leadership team about, hey, even though we have to have multiple plans, don't know which option we're going to go with, but we need to have something in place to meet with those students in different scenarios. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you. It looks like some people have been entering in it. Feel free to take yourself off mute if you'd like. Continuous conscientious communication and the iceberg metaphor. Advice to think about the future state and how to create a transition model with that in mind. Layer in strategy when looking to make a decision, plan for future state with scenario-based variables. The key questions we need to ask, things to consider as we transition back, and determining what the new normal should be. And leading from the heart, there are going to be a lot of different situations out there, and though we may have plans in place, we need to remain flexible for our individual needs of our employees. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as promised, we want to make sure that these are 45 minutes or less because your time is so valuable. We have been recording this, so we'll send out this recording and resources along with that to you within the next 24 to 48 hours. And I just appreciate you carving out this time to connect and communicate and to collaborate on what happens next. So I hope that you will join us next week for our topic centered around what does the virtual workplace look like moving forward? Should we do it? Should we not? What are the key things that we need to keep in mind for that? And if there are topics that you would like to have us discuss or bring some content to it, please share that with us. One of the things that Tiki and I are considering is continuing this on a monthly basis, especially as that transition is probably going to take some time when we get back to the workplace. So appreciate all of you. Have an amazing day, and I'll connect with you soon. Bye, everyone.